Everyone, I'm Allie Buchman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I am going to do this bracelet today, which features some crescents, and I'm calling it the High Tower bracelet. Reminds me of kind of a peaks on a tower in architecture. So for this project, we are utilizing and kind of making the crescent shapes shine. If you haven't seen crescents or have not used them before, the crescent bead is a little bead here that has a little moon shape, and it has two holes, and it's thicker on the exterior than it is on the interior. If you need any of these products or any of the products used in this video, feel free to follow some links that we're going to drop down here on the left hand side for the different products. Also, if you go below the video, there's a little show more button, and that show more button underneath the description of the video will give you links to the products. As well, you can always shop at PotomacBeads.com, as well as visit our actual retail location stores and gather some materials there. When you're looking to do this bracelet here, the High Tower, I am going to be changing up the colors a little bit and have gone through a lot of different versions to get this one, which I really like. For the crescent colors, I'm using the metallic purple suede in the crescents, and then I am using the Pacifica Avocado in the green color, which has that nice little shine to it in the green. The whole bracelet is going to be highlighted by some crystals, and I'm using the Potomac crystal rondelles in the metallic transparent purple. It almost has a clear and then purple look, which goes in really nicely with the colors. In the example piece, I was using 11/0s in the Montana blue gold luster of the seed beads. I'm going to switch to make it really pop to my crystal Labrador 11/0 seed beads. In addition to the crystals, the crescents, and the seed beads, I have a button that I'm going to be closing the whole thing off with. And for the button, I'm going to be using the Potomac Bead Company, the PC button, and this is in the Lila, the crystal Lila luster. That's going to be used to close it all off as we finish off the bracelet. As always, you need some string to thread the bracelet on, and I'm playing around with one of the new colors of Wildfire. I could have chosen two different colors of Wildfire for this, which is pretty cool. I'm going to be using the gray color. If you're doing the video and doing the pattern with the same exact beads, you could also use the green color as well. I used the gray because of the crystals kind of having a little bit of a gray tone to them, and because I'm going to be using the crystal Labrador bead, I decided the gray would go nicely with that. Especially because you do see, because of the shape of the crescents, you see a tiny bit of thread. I did a lot of versions of this in order to change it so you would see the least amount of thread possible, but you do see a little bit. You are going to need one size 10 needle. You could use a size 12 also if you prefer that, but with the 0.0006 thread, which is the only size they make the gray and the new blue in, it's going to be easier to use a size 10 needle with that. As always, I have my thread zap 2 handy to actually take the thread off my spool. I have some super new glue sitting handy to tie my knots, and then I usually have a pair of pliers that's handy to flatten out the end of my thread to make it easier to thread the needle. I am working on my bead on it board, and you can see it has a little bumper. A bead mat or a bead on it board, if you haven't done a lot of beading or you don't do a lot of beading or you're just getting started, you definitely want a workable surface. So this is the bead on it board. Got a little bit of some beads on it the last video that I did, but it has a nice surface, and it kind of makes the beads pop up a little bit. So either a bead mat or a bead on it board are a really great idea. For this bracelet, I am going to be using all of the beads on the first go round. So go ahead and make little piles of your beads. And we're going to start out with about 5 feet of beading thread. That's the length of thread that I like to start out with. That's nice and comfortable. If we need to add thread, I'll show you how to add thread to the bracelet because we are going and zigzagging up and back a number of times. But when we add thread, I'll show you how to do that. More than 5 feet of thread really gets hard to handle and hard to work with. So go ahead and make some piles of your different materials, those 4 different beads, and we'll get ready to get started. So the first thing to do to get started on the bracelet is to leave a little bit of a tail, because we're going to be adding the clasp on second and kind of last as we go on. So I'm going to leave myself about a 10-inch tail so I can go back and do that. And I'm going to use a stop bead. I have a galvanized gold from a previous video that I had on. I put that on the end of my thread, leaving that 12 inches, and go back through it 2 times away from that 12-inch tail. Once you have that on, we're going to get to the center of the bracelet here, and we are going to get started with our purple suede. So the tricky thing with the crescents is that they have a top and they have a bottom as well. So we're going to be facing and kind of thinking along the lines that as we look at the crescents here, the purple crescents, we're going to be sitting them on a V. To pick them up, we're going to pick them up so that the bump is facing up like that through the second hole. So the hole is going to be closest to us, sitting in a dome shape. After you pick up one of your beads, you're going to add one of your 11-0 seed beads and pick up another one of your crescents going in the same direction. Let that all drop down next to your stop bead there. And there's your first rotation of your actual project. So that's going to be our first little V section that we're working on. When I'm coming out of that crescent, I'm going to start to put on the green crescent. The green crescent goes through, this time through the hole that's on the further side, going through that first hole, putting on one of the green, then I'm going to put on a crystal, and then another green crescent, so that that green crescent, that avocado one, faces the same direction. So you can see the pattern there. After that, we're going to switch back to our purple, going through and putting them on. And you're going to want to make sure that it's always through the same direction, that the crescent is always facing upwards, and that we're going through that first hole of the purple and the second hole of the green, adding a seed bead in between each of those crescent beads. However it works for you to keep track of the crescent as far as where it's sitting, you can keep track that way. But I'm going to continue adding on this same pattern with my two purple with a seed bead in between, and then going right into my crescent, picking up that top hole, and then after adding the crescent, adding a crystal, and then another crescent. Once you have that on there, you're going to repeat the whole length of your bracelet. It shrinks up a little bit, but it is a rather wide bracelet, so you want to do this if you're looking for about a 7-inch wrist. You're going to want to do this about 6 3/4 inches, the whole length of your bracelet. So just to show you as you're working on it, what it'll look like. So it all bunches kind of to one direction. I have on 24 of my greens. That would mean I have on 26 of my purple beads, just to let you know. And you can see the beads kind of sit in the opposite direction until you pull those avocado crescents down. They're going to want to sit facing up and facing down. So if it does make it easier for you to pick them up when you're working on them, you can think about it in that fashion, that one faces up, one faces down, and that'll make it easy to string. What we're going to do now is add our second level of our bracelet on here. So when you're looking as far as which direction you're going, we're going to be adding a set, another set basically of our beads, and then we're going to go back to the other side and add the crescents. So to go from one hole of this purple crescent to the other, I'm going to pick up 3 of my 11-0 seed beads and sew back the opposite direction towards the stop bead with those 3 11-0s decorating the side of that last crescent bead. Give a nice tight pull so you make sure that you don't have any slack here down on the starting end. And you're going to start now to bend and make sure those avocado beads kind of sit back to the one direction. When I'm near the, when I'm in between here and above the crescents where there's a seed bead, that's where I'm going to be adding another set of my green beads. So I'm going to be adding another set of the avocado, basically mirroring what I just did, adding the avocado and my crystal. So I'm going to pick up these beads here, going through that first hole as I'm heading back, then I pick up a crystal, and then I pick up another crescent. Crescent beads are one of those that a lot of beads I pick up with my needle. I don't know why crescent beads seem hard for me to pick up with my needle. So a lot of times I just do that in my hand. Press those crescent beads kind of down into place, and then you're going to sew through the purple crescent, pulling those beads into place, making sure that they're going to sit almost like I did in the tulip video. They're going to sit looking almost like a herringbone style. When I'm coming out of the purple crescent and my green beads are below, I'm simply going to pick up one of my 11-ohs and sew over to the next purple bead. And that's going to bring it in that angle. Between the two purples then, with just the seed bead, you're going to do another crescent and crystal combo. So I'm adding my crescents and my crystal. And one thing I didn't mention about the crescents, because they are a 2-hole bead, before you get started, you may want to make sure that they have both holes. All of the 2-hole beads are going to have some default in them. It's a small bead, and sometimes the glass just doesn't take like they want it to. So that second hole sometimes will get clogged in the coating process or during the actual creation of them. Once I have on that crescent, crystal crescent, I'm going through that purple crescent. I'm just kind of forcing those crescents to sit the correct direction, because that way you'll get a better tension and you won't see as much thread. Coming out of the purple crescent, an 11-oh goes on, and I sew to the next crescent. You can see kind of that turn starting to occur. Again, then you do your crescents. Oops. I had about 7 versions of this bracelet, so I'm kind of chopping it apart in order to create here. You put on your crescents again. And then back through that purple crescent. So the previous avocado crescents, right now we're not doing anything with them. They're kind of hanging out there at the bottom. You're forcing those down, and we'll come back through and connect to those on our next version or our next pass through. But currently this pass through, I'm just adding those crescents into place, and then I'm also adding in between here those crystals as well. So you're going to go the whole length of the bracelet right now, adding in the green crescents and the crystals and just that a little 11-oh silver seed bead, because we're completely done adding our purple crescents. So just to show you, it kind of looks like a jumbled mess right now, because until we get the next pass in, which adds a bunch of our crystals, the crescents really aren't going to sit very nicely for you. So when you're looking at the design here, it looks a little bit bundled up. And like I said, until you really get into doing the actual third row here of our beads, then you're going to have that jumbled look to it. So for my last pass here, I'm putting in my last 2 of my crescent beads. So I'm just going to repeat that here, going and putting on the crescents. I'm getting my crystal on. Once I have those, I'm going to be at the very exterior of my crescents here. So I'm at that very last purple bead, and I'm going to go through the purple bead and kind of give a nice tight pull. When you set the beads and the crescents up, you'll be able to see that kind of shape starting to occur. Because the crescents do have that funky shape, you're not really going to see it until we go back in here and add. To get from the one purple crescent here to the exterior green crescent that we just put on, I'm going to add 3 of my 11-oh seed beads in the silver color and sew back towards me through that top hole of the crescent. That's going to put those 3 seed beads right on the side of the purple crescent. When I'm coming back down the bracelet now, anytime I'm above a crystal, I'm going to go ahead and put on 3 more crystals. So I'm coming out here in between the green crescents. I'm going to put on 3 more crystals. and put that on. So you can see those 3 crystals just kind of sit inside there. Next, I'm going to add an 11/0 seed bead, and just like we did with our purple, I'm going to sew from one of my avocado beads to the other. And at this point, I should have mentioned I'm done putting on my crescents. So you can see the 3 beads connect and then 1. I'm back to the middle here, and I'm going to grab one of my crescent beads, going from the one avocado to the other avocado. So I'm going to go ahead and add my 3 crystals and sew through that next avocado colored bead. Giving a nice tight pull, which is going to force those 3 beads to sit in a nice curve. Again, coming out the avocado, I'm going to add my 11/0. If you want to, you could even have 15/0s on hand and add a 15/0 right in there. Again, coming out, adding my 3 crystals. So this is a pretty simple bracelet, just adding in the crystals, now going down the whole way. And this is going to force that one set of crescents to sit correctly. The next set of crescents won't really sit nice until we go back and do the exact same pattern on the top. So right now, going in to create our little V's here, our little towers, go ahead and do your 3 crystals and then your 1 seed bead the whole way down the line. So I've gone the whole way down now, adding in those 3 crystal and that 1 seed bead, and you can see that it has a little bit of curvature. That's because we haven't come back and done the other side yet. When we do the other side, we're going to proceed the exact same way, kind of forcing those crescents to sit nicely and forcing them up and adding the crystals in between as well. To get from the bottom here to the top of the project, I'm simply going to add 3 of my 11/0 seed beads, sew through those 3 seed beads right there. And you can see here, it almost looks like we have a missing V. So what I'm going to do is just continue on with my 3 11/0 seed beads, because the shape has to end. And actually, we can go back like I did on my sample piece. We're going to add a crescent in. We'll add that crescent in. Adding then 3 seed beads, going from that first hole to the second hole of the crescent, pulling those seed beads down nice and tightly down into the project. And then when I'm coming out that crescent bead, it's going to be treated like my first row here, where I put on 1 11/0 and go through the next avocado bead, making sure that's sitting correctly for you. Then when you're coming out of that crescent, you're going to force that previous crescent here to kind of sit in the correct location. Add 3 more crystals, and then it's right down the line. When you're through after 3 crystals, you add an 11/0, force that next crescent up, sew through that next crescent, pulling tightly, and now 3 more crystals go on. So as you continue down the line here, you're just doing that same thing that we did to the previous side, adding the 3 crystals and then the 1 seed bead. 3 crystals, 1 seed bead, forcing those crescents to come back to their correct side and adding in as you go. So you're going to continue on with the pattern, doing those 3 crystals and then the seed bead to get that nice zigzag effect. Once you get to the end of the design, we're going to go ahead and basically remove our stop bead. We're going to push it off to the side, and just like we did previously where we added in the last green bead on the other side, we're going to do the same thing on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and put on 1 of my 11/0s, because that would be the last one here. Move that stop bead out a little bit. Add 3 of my 11/0 seed beads and come back down that bead as well as through my purple bead here. Give a nice tight pull, and that's going to decorate the end just like we did previously with that other 11/0 seed bead. Taking my needle and thread, I'm going to back through that other hole of the purple bead and come out. Because my needle and thread are out at the exact same place right now, I'm going to take that stop bead off completely and just tie these thread ends together. Once you have those thread ends tied, if you want to, you can either work with the long piece of thread that we started with, or you can work with the thread that's still on the needle. Either way. I was thinking we would end on a different side, so I apologize for that. Extra thread. Once you have that tied off a couple times, you can burn down the thread if you want to, and we'll come back and we'll glue it then. But right now I'm going to get ready to put on my clasp. The first thing I'm going to do is add my button, and then I'll add my loop on the other end. To add my button, I want to have 4 of my 11/0 seed beads, and then I'm going to go up through the back of the button here. When I'm coming out the front of the button, I'm only going to use 2 holes, even though it has 4. And I'm going to decorate the button with 3 holes, or 3 11/0 seed beads here. Coming back down the button, I'm going to come down on a diagonal, so that way I'm not going side by side and the button will sit off. You can see it'll kind of set there on the diagonal. When I'm coming out of the button, I'm going to add 3 more 11/0s and sew back through that 4th 11/0 that we originally just put on. That's going to create a little V there behind the button for the button to sit in. Sewing them back through that crescent bead, the purple one, through the hole closest to me. I'm going to go through that bottom hole. And then I'm going to reverse the thread, coming through the top hole and coming out the avocado crescent. And I don't want to come out any of the seed beads, I just want to come out the crescent. When I do that, I'm going to decorate by putting on 3 more of my 11/0s. I'm sorry, 2 more 11/0s. And then I'm going to sew back up through that whole clasp. So to sew back up through the clasp, I'm going to reinforce it going through that same 11/0 seed bead that both threads came through, and then back up the whole way through the button, through the seed beads at the top of the button, and then down the opposite direction. All I'll do then is tie off my thread end here. If you did have that original thread end and you kept it a little bit longer, you can tie there again. I'm going to sew back through my project a little bit along the middle row and tie off in my project. Once you have the button on this first side, I'm going to go back to the opposite side and get ready to add on the loop. When I get to the other side, all I've done is started with a new piece of thread. So when I'm coming through with a new piece of thread, generally I'll tie it on somewhere or just kind of let it hang out for now at the end. You can even, if you want to, add a stop bead with a different bead that's there, just leaving yourself enough of a tail in order to tie a knot as we do that. I also like to sew when I have to add thread at the end, sew back into my project a little bit with my thread. I'm going to go into these last 3 beads here on the end, coming through the crescent, add 3 more seed beads, and I'm going to sew through the second to the bottom bead coming out of that metallic purple crescent. When I come out that bead here, that's going to put me to the center of the bracelet. I want to sit to the center of the bracelet because when I do the clasp, I want to make sure that it sits centered so that my button will go on correctly. To make the loop, all I'm going to do then is just make my loop with my seed beads. If you want to, you could add a little crystal on the end. That's up to you. I'm just going to do a loop. To start my loop, I have a bunch of my 11-0s, but I'm going to put on 2 to start. So just remember that 2 number. And then we're going to put on about 25 of my 11-0s to create my loop for my button. Actually, a couple more than that. Sorry, I'm used to the cut button. So we're putting on a couple more, and this is a good opportunity with your 11-0s to kind of clean up your bead mat. I kind of pick them up from all over. If you need to, you can dump out a couple extras. Add those on. And just like we did the button side, we're also going to reinforce this loop. To reinforce the loop, we're going to come back down those 2 beads that I said to remember that you put 2 on. If you do have a metal clasp that you want to use, you could use a 2-strand bar clasp or tube clasp, or you could just use a regular button. You could a metal button. If you are using anything with metal, I would suggest using some wire protectors with that. It finishes the end really nicely, gives a good look and a nice clean look. When we're at the end here, then we're going to pick up those last 2 beads that I put, or the first 2 beads rather that I put on. Pull that loop closed. I'm just going to measure my cut button here to make sure, my faceted button here to make sure it's going to fit through that loop. I'm going to add 1 more. Took off too many. I'm going to add 2 beads back in here. Again, so down through those 2 and out. Once we're doing that, just like we did the other side, I'm going to sew up some of the seed beads through the crescent, back down to the bottom hole of that same crescent, and out some of the seed beads. Once you get your needle on, you can see I kind of shake the needle there to get it through. I'm going to reinforce then, going back up through some of the seed beads to get to my loop, and pull that thread and needle then the whole way through the loop that I just created. If you want to, you could do a peyote stitch on the loop, even a small herringbone stitch on the loop as well. After reinforcing, all you're going to do is sew back through the project and tie off your thread. I go back to the piece of thread at the beginning here of this second piece that I added, and I'll tie off to that as well. After tying off, pick up some of your super glue, glue the ends of your thread down, and burn off the last little bits. Once you do that, you'll have the whole thing done. Because of the nature of the crescents, and especially working with crystals, you want to make sure after pulling the center row tight, you want to make sure to kind of let the project lay down a little bit, so that way it lays nice and correct. So I'm here at the corner. I'll take off that stop bead and tie those 2 thread ends together, and then sew back through my project so that way it reinforces a little bit more, and the clasp is not just simply a separate piece of thread. I sew more into the actual project. After I have the knots, and then I'm going to retrace some of my area with this thread here, going back through some of my seed beads and my crescents, snaking along the project and reinforcing that last little edge. Once you're done gluing and doing the loop and having it done, you will be completely finished with your bracelet. So you can see the fun shape that the crescents have to them and the fun dimension that they lead. Adding that crystals gives a bit of a pop and a sparkle as well. If you do need any of the materials, remember you can go back to the beginning of the video to the different links. You can also visit us at PotomacBeads.com, as well as stay connected with this YouTube site by subscribing to receive regular video updates of the different projects that we do and we make, as well as new product updates and information about what's going on in the beading world and new things coming and different events. So stay tuned with us there. You can also go and visit us on Facebook, and you can also ask to join our beading and jewelry making group, and there we give ideas, show the different projects that we're making. It's a great interaction with a community of beaders that are like-minded, positive spirit, and have awesome ideas. Ask lots of questions and you can help out other people there, as well as get your questions answered as well. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody, and have fun creating.